Well, the Palestinian Authority's vice president has welcomed Hamas's positive response and former President Donald Trump's call for an end to the Gaza conflict. That is current president, in fact, of the United States, President Donald Trump. The PA further expressed readiness to work towards a ceasefire, hostage release, aid access, as well as a political solution that is based on a two-state framework. And Palestinian President Mahmoud Abbas also emphasized the urgent need for a complete ceasefire. And for more on this, let's get the latest with SABC News Correspondent Blake Sifton, who's joining us live from Tel Aviv in Israel. Blake, a very good afternoon to you once again. So a lot has since transpired since we last spoke yesterday. Latest developments being, of course, the news that Hamas has in fact accepted Donald Trump's ultimatum. Yet we are still receiving reports currently, if I'm looking at my script about an hour ago, of more deadly attacks by Israel on Gaza just a couple of hours ago. What can you reliably tell us at this stage?
Good afternoon. That's right. Despite President Trump's demand last night that Israel immediately halt the bombing of Gaza, it has continued. There's been shelling and airstrikes overnight and into this morning. We understand from local health authorities that at least 20 Palestinians have been killed today. Now, what has changed on the ground in terms of the military situation is the Israeli government has ordered the Israeli military to pause its offensive to seize and occupy Gaza City and to transition into a defensive posture. So Israeli forces are no longer advancing deeper into Gaza City. They're no longer destroying Hamas infrastructure and seeking out contact with fighters. However, the Israeli military has said and warned Palestinian civilians who fled Gaza City not to return home, not to return north. They've said that the area remains an active combat zone. Of course, the cessation of all hostilities is a prerequisite for that release of the Israeli hostages by Hamas.
And Blake, I mean, what are the conditions, though, of this current deal? As we understand, Hamas stopped short of actually accepting the deal unconditionally. Have they made any official remarks ahead of their arrival in Cairo to negotiate through mediators later on today?
So this deal is essentially, this response to the proposed deal is essentially the yes, but that many people expected of Hamas. They have accepted parts of it. They have suggested resistance to other parts of it. They have totally ignored and not mentioned other parts. And they've obviously said that substantial, comprehensive negotiations are needed. Now, they've agreed to release all 48 Israeli hostages, both living and dead, once the field conditions are met. By that, they mean when Israel stops hostilities and completes a modest withdrawal from Gaza, but they have suggested to mediators that this 72-hour deadline to release all hostages might not be realistic because they will need to find and access and retrieve the bodies of many deceased hostages. We will need to have negotiations on how and when Hamas members can go and look for those deceased hostages. And of course, the glaring absence from this response is on disarming. Now, after releasing the hostages, Israel's second major demand is that Hamas be completely disarmed, and they have not mentioned that in their response. There are reports that Hamas's military commander in Gaza wants a distinction made between offensive weapons and defensive weapons, that they would be willing to hand over offensive weapons like rockets to Egypt, but they would want to maintain their possession of defensive weapons like assault rifles and small arms. In the past, they've said that any disarmament is a red line, and that could very well be a major stumbling block. And of course, there also needs to be clarity in negotiations on the full withdrawal of Israeli forces from Gaza. At the time of the release of the hostages, only a partial, modest withdrawal would be carried out, and the full withdrawal would be tied to the progress of this international stabilization force that is meant to enter Gaza and assist with demilitarization. But Hamas will not accept that. They will want timetables, they will want maps, and they want specifics about how that withdrawal will be carried out. So there remain many issues to be ironed out here. And we do understand that negotiations may begin as early as tomorrow in Egypt.
And speaking of those stumbling blocks, Blake, I mean, there's a lot of concerns around, of course, Netanyahu not, of course, sabotaging this particular deal. In fact, I was actually reading some responses from some residents in Jerusalem who are very concerned that, of course, key and central to this peace deal going through, it needs to be Netanyahu. What is the response from the Israeli side to these current proposals?
Officially, the Israeli government has said that they are ready to implement the beginning of this deal, meaning the hostage release and the situation on the ground that would be required for that. However, Netanyahu reportedly views Hamas's response as negative. He believes that is purposely vague and is intended to buy time rather than actually intending to reach a deal through negotiations. He was also apparently and reportedly very surprised by President Trump saying that Hamas was ready for peace. He thinks that that enthusiasm is premature. And of course, we really do need to remember that we still haven't heard from the far-right members of Netanyahu's governing coalition yet today. Today is the Sabbath, so much of the country shuts down until sundown on Saturday, and you don't generally hear from many politicians, including the far-right members of his cabinet. They have slammed this deal in the past. The question is whether they will work to thwart it. They are completely against elements of it, like the Palestinian Authority having a role in governing Gaza once they take over from this transitional government of technocrats. Of course, they are against the idea of there being pathways to a Palestinian state. They are against the promise Israel must make not to annex or occupy Gaza. And they are against the promise that Palestinians will not be forced to leave Gaza and that those who have left can return. If these negotiations actually get to the point where a deal is ready to be signed, it will need to be approved by Netanyahu's security cabinet. And at that stage, the far right could object. They could leave the government, collapse his coalition, and try to thwart it. But moderate leaders of parties in Israel have said that if that were to happen, they would step in to prop up the government in order to make this deal go through.
So quite a lot to get through still, as of course we wait from both sides, of course, for those moves. Blake, a very quick one as we conclude. Let's get the latest on the Flotilla detainees. Yesterday, you mentioned some detainees were actually embarking on a hunger strike. We're also hearing of Turkish activists actually being deported today.
That's right. Just before I joined you, we got news from the Israeli Foreign Ministry that a flight from southern Israel to Istanbul departed today. It was organized by the Turkish government, and it had 137 activists on it. They're from a varied list of countries. If you allow me, I'll just list these quickly for you. From the US, Italy, the UK, Jordan, Kuwait, Libya, Algeria, Mauritania, Malaysia, Bahrain, Morocco, Switzerland, Tunisia, and Turkey. Notably, none of the South African activists are listed on this announcement by the Israeli government.
All right, Blake, thank you so much as always for that comprehensive update. Blake Sifton, SABC News Correspondent, live to us from Tel Aviv in Israel with the very latest from the war-ravaged enclave, as well as those detainees that were detained after being on that flotilla.